to this one for the open. That'll be good. You all right with that, Chris?
Each of us to intro ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Just gonna go around the table. Hey, mic check real quick.
Test 1, 2, 3.
Good.
Hello, this is Dr. Christopher Holtz.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good.
Check 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Check.
It's really windy outside. I wish it would stop. How about that for a sound?
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Christopher Holtz from the Department of Political Science at Fort Hays State University, the forward-thinking, world-ready university based in Hays, Kansas. Welcome to this edition of the Kansas Legislature. We're here to talk about the special session and the path forward in the 2021 session. We have 3 guests tonight. We'll allow the representatives to introduce themselves. We'll start with Representative Wasinger.
Thank you. I'm Barb Wasinger. I represent the 111th District, which is simplified, the southeast corner of Ellis County. It's Hayes, Victoria, Munger, and parts of Antonino. I am on the tax committee, and this is the chair of the tax committee, so I see him every day. And we groan when you say, well, we're going to have to meet on Friday. But I'm on the tax committee, financial institutions and pensions, which means banks, credit unions, farm credit, and capers. And I'm also on higher education budget. So that my chair for that is Representative Ken Rogers, and financial institutions is Representative Jim Kelly. So I'm very fortunate. I have people that really know what they're talking about and what they're doing, and I go along for the ride, and it's been a great year. So it's nice to be here.
Thank you for being on. Representative Johnson.
Thank you. Stephen Johnson. I represent the 108th District. It's my 10th year in the legislature, so it has gone pretty quickly. It doesn't seem like it would be that long. The committees that I serve on, I do serve on the Appropriations Committee with Chairman Waymaster, who is here. I serve on Education. I chair the Tax Committee, as Representative Wasinger mentioned, and I also either chair or am the vice chair of the Joint Committee on Pensions and Benefits.
Representative Waymaster.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being here. I'm Representative Troy Waymaster, and I'm the representative for the 109th Kansas House District, which represents the counties of Russell, Osborne, Smith, Jewell, Lincoln, Barton, and Rush. And I am the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and then I'm also a member of the State Finance Council, and then I'm also on the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. This year I'll be serving as vice chair, and we'll be having our first meeting next week during the break until the 2021 session. And then I was also named on the Strengthening People and Revitalizing Kansas Task Force, which actually we just had a meeting today in Topeka to talk about the CARES Act money that's going to be flowing into the state of Kansas. Those recommendations that go from that task force then go to the State Finance Council before they are actually appropriated for the state of Kansas. But it's good to be here, and thank you.
Thank you all for being a part of this session. And the 24th special session in Kansas State history was convened on June 3rd following a proclamation by Governor Kelly on May 26th. The House, by a vote of 107 to 12, passed the COVID-19 response bill on June 3rd, and on June 4th, the Senate passed an identical measure, 26 to 12. Supporters in the Senate forced the bill to vote without a debate. The COVID-19 response bill was the only measure debated during the special session, following Governor Kelly vetoing the prior COVID-19 legislation. Under the special session COVID-19 response bill, the governor's state of emergency is extended through September 15th. Governor Kelly cannot close businesses until September 15th. She will have to get approval if she were to attempt to close businesses beyond 15 days from the State Finance Council. And in terms of distribution of the $1.25 billion in federal aid to the state for costs tied to the pandemic, the bill requires approval of distribution for costs tied to disaster relief to the counties. Needs approval from the State Finance Council. So all three of you voted in favor of the legislation. What are the beneficial things that will come out of this response bill? We'll start with Representative Wasinger.
Well, I think there needed to be oversight on all the monies that were coming in. Unfortunately, when all this struck, we treated every county as if it was like every other county, whether it was urban or rural. And there's so many rural communities that didn't have any cases of COVID. So we wanted to make sure that restrictions on businesses and sizes could be decided by the counties and cities that could be less restrictive than what the governor had. It gives small businesses more of a chance. She can't close the businesses again, which has been a tremendous economic problem. And so it was important that we have some oversight for her. And that's really what the bill did. And also protected private businesses, large businesses, and also people that wanted their security intact with contact tracing. So it was wide ranging. It took quite a while for both sides to come to an agreement between House and Senate and Republican and Democrat. And I can honestly say I don't think anyone's happy with every part of it. But we came to an agreement that I think works really well, and I think it's important that when we go back in January, that we look over the emergency powers again and try to make them even better, where it doesn't matter whether whether it's a Republican or Democratic governor. We need to make sure that we have some oversight.
And I would also say that when we left on March 19th, we were still at the beginning stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. We knew that we needed to get a budget passed. We knew there was going to be some ramifications while we were on the interim in the month of April. And so that's why we had it set up that there would be any money that was going to be discussed, or the Legislative Coordinating Council could review every single executive order and see whether or not that the legislature just being not a backstop, but just kind of having oversight, as Representative Wasinger had mentioned, they would have the ability to say whether or not it might be overreaching. The only problem with that is when the Legislative Coordinating Council was sued, the Supreme Court did come back and say the Legislative Coordinating Council does not represent the entire legislative body. So that was the reason why that particular item in the first executive order was stricken down. So we had to come back and revisit it. There were some, obviously some things that Governor Kelly didn't like in the first one when we came back on sine die on May 21st. And so that's what precipitated the special session. And there was a compromise that was made between the leadership in the House and the Senate and the governor on how we move forward. I mean, we were all told and briefed that no amendments. If there's any amendments put on, the governor would veto it. We'd be there longer than we needed to be. And actually the bill did pass clean through the House and the Senate and went to the governor.
Representative Johnson.
Yeah, it's unusual to pass clean without those changes, and several of us had different things that we were interested in and pursued, at least around the edges of the debate, if not in the debate, to say, could we do something different for nursing homes? Well, we could, but what does that do to the deal with the governor's office? Well, that deal is off. And several pursued things such as that to see what changes could be made that some of us like better. But the overall agreement, many had worked hard. Leadership, both parties, all chambers, and including the governor. And despite the length of debate, had I watched the debate in the House on the bill and seen the contentious statements that were made, I would have never told you it would pass with 107 votes. That's not what it sounded like as I watched that. But that's actually really pretty high agreement, not necessarily with every piece, but that this is what we need. And you outlined the key pieces that were in that bill, and it is the oversight, and the State Finance Council will work with the governor to make sure that that little over $1 billion is directed where it is best needed, to ratify that executive order so that the federal funds aren't in jeopardy. That was critical and needed to be nailed down. To make sure, as Representative Wasinger said, that the business closures would not continue. I think there was a sense that it is very different across the state, and the risks and the resources that we have in a Wyandotte County versus a Wallace County are very different. And how do we assess those risks that we're actually experiencing given the resources that we have in each place? And we think that the county is better able to do that for the businesses, for the sizes of gatherings, and all of those things. A couple other things that were useful: the liability protection was also there, where healthcare providers and businesses, if they follow the guidelines as stated, they would be immune from liability. Not immune from any liability that is there, but if in good faith they did all things that were laid out to do, that would protect them from the liability that could arise from the unknowns as we face the continuing risks of the pandemic. And then telemedicine is something we've used more in the rural areas, but introducing it not only rural but across the state to keep healthcare healthcare providers and patients safe, and to provide access. Some key things in the regulations to allow everybody to do business. And it goes on. I forget, were there like 38 sections to the bill?
38 or 37.
It's quite a few different sections that were there, and some of those were in multiple sections, but I think those were the key points.
And since you mentioned it, the liability protections don't apply to nursing homes, and one of the concerns is that with the potential for lawsuits, that some of these nursing homes are going to face tough financial times, potentially even go bankrupt. Is this something that Kansans should be concerned about?
Well, I think we all believe that it should be addressed, but the governor did not want that in the bill and would not sign it if we kept the rest homes, the nursing homes in there. You'd have to get her reasoning for that, but there are certainly a lot of us who wanted different things added to the bill, but we all came back to this is what was agreed on over probably 48 hours of nonstop negotiations between every party. It was important to get something on the books now and take the time this summer and go through emergency powers and go through what we've, all of the things that were decided and see how we can improve upon it.
Now, as a part of the Kansas Legislature, the show allows you to be a part of the dialogue. We have a call-in, 1-800-337-4788. We have a caller on the line now, Bob from Russell. Bob, thank you for calling into the Kansas Legislature.
I'm calling in regards to something that you probably don't want to talk about this time because of the virus. But is there ever a chance you could amend the Capers law to include cost of living increases? And second question is, do you believe not too far future that they'll probably change the way the retirement program is in Kansas and Capers will no longer be the way it was? Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you, Bob. Any of the representatives want to?
Sure. A couple. Do you want to start on it? Or you want me to jump
No,
right
go
in
ahead.
on it?
You jump right in.
I heard two questions there with Bob. One dealt with the cost of living with Capers, and the other is if that retirement program would change or be gone in the future. So on the cost of living, I don't see that on the horizon. As we saw the decline in the market and the value of assets drop precipitously, that always worries us with the funded ratio. It is that funded ratio that has been a concern for some time. The Capers, there are two ways to set up a program, whether you're buying an annuity or the Capers program, and you can either pay for that cost of living or not, and the way it was funded was without a cost of living adjustment. So if we add a cost of living benefit, we just have to find a way to also allocate funds for that. It is possible, but the committees have discussed that and said if we add that cost of living, from where do we take the funds? There was a small adjustment made on the KP&F, the fire plan, where they increased the contribution rate of all the active members to change one value of the retirement benefits. So that was an easy one to do because there was a stream that directly paid for it. Taking it out of the existing balance, as was done many times in the 90s and the early 2000s, does compound the unfunded piece, and the first focus has been making sure that benefit is secure not only for retirees today, but particularly for retirees in the future, and making sure that there's equity between what we put in and what each employee group takes out. Right now, our greatest benefit has been for our older employees. I'm in Tier 2, and I have a greater benefit than Tier 3. So Tier 3, and many of our retirees are in Tier 1, the first and original tier. Tier 3 is already a very different retirement program. It's no longer the Capers that we know that guarantees a payment for life. It does set a balance that you can annuitize if you wish to have that payment for life, but the benefit is calculated to be about 2/3 of what the benefit would have been for an existing retiree. So again, a concern if I give yet more benefits to the earlier groups, I'm giving about a third less to the current group. If I then tax and reduce benefits further for that group, it's trying to keep that all in balance. However, the good news is, given that benefits are guaranteed with the current retirees, those benefits are guaranteed. They are secure with the assets that are there. I don't see those changing. On the near horizon, I don't see a change to Tier 3 either. It already changed in 2015, and I think that that will continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. So thanks for the question.
Representative Waymaster, do you have anything to
I
add?
was going to say, Representative Johnson covered it very well, and he actually has great expertise in capers, so I really can't elaborate any more on what he had said. But I've spoken to Bob many times. I recognize the voice, and we've talked about the cost of living increase. And actually, that was an agenda item for a lot of capers beneficiaries this year. We received many emails in regards to requests for a cost of living increase. The only thing is that we have a different perspective than when we started the session in January. The budget has completely changed for the state of Kansas. When we started this session, this year we were having a $1 billion surplus, and now we're facing a $650 million deficit for fiscal year 2021. And there's a cost to the cost of living increase. There's been talk, I'm not saying this is what the legislature is going to enact, but there has been some discussion that the governor says in order to balance the budget, we may hold off on the capers payment because it is a pretty large line item in the state budget. So things have changed dramatically since we started in January to when we are now. And we'll just have to see exactly where things do pan out when we go back in January 2021 for the next legislative session.
And I think it's important to underscore that they're guaranteed benefits.
Yes.
It is, capers by no means is bankrupt. Capers is alive and well. Capers could use, certainly, us to pay back some of the money that we borrowed from them, but it's a solid program. And in the meantime, we've been trying to take care of varying entities such as spouses of fallen officers and firefighters. So we have expanded somewhat the reach of capers due to the capers board coming and speaking to us. So it's a good program. It's much healthier than it was years past, and will continue to be. We just need to stay on top of it. But as Representative Waymaster said, we're coming up on a huge budget shortfall. We do have to figure out where the money is going to come from to pay for everything in full.
And we have another caller to the Kansas Legislature. It's Rhonda from Wichita. Rhonda, hello, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you for taking my call. I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say that the only measure that was considered during this last very short session, because now didn't the Senate vote not to confirm Justice as a Court of Appeals Justice, Mr. Carl Folsom? What was that all about?
Well, what that had to do with Rhonda, and obviously the Senate is the one who confirms any type of appointment that's made by the governor. The House does not. So obviously, I'm sure all of us listened in on some of the hearings or saw what was going on in the Judiciary Committee. But it had to do, the reason why they did not confirm that particular appointee was due to previous interactions that he had or different clients that he had in regards to the past. That was the reason he was not confirmed. Yes, they did take up the confirmation in the Senate. It didn't pass, but the only other measure that we did take up was the executive order.
Well, Rhonda's question does speak to the politicized nature of the special session. It was a very good segue. Governor Kelly said in an interview with the Kansas City Star that the question of extending the state of emergency itself was, quote, just a power struggle. This would never have happened if I hadn't been a Democrat, unquote. What are your thoughts on Governor Kelly's assessment? Now, I know I'm speaking to an all-Republican panel, but nonetheless, was partisanship in Topeka a element within the special session?
I think you need, when you talk about any legislative body, there isn't always some partisanship. In this case, I don't think it had anything to do with her being a Democrat. It had to do with qualifying the right person. And they found some significant issues. So I think the governor is very quick to say, she's playing nice and we're not playing, the Republicans are not. But when you get there, you will realize that that's not how it really works. Everyone does try to work for the best of Kansas. So yes, there's some partisanship, and I think it's wrong to expect there wouldn't be, because we're basically a two-party system. So I personally don't believe that it was any different whether it was a Republican governor or a Democratic governor. We really found the Senate really found something wrong with someone.
Well, and I would just look at the past history that I've served in the 8 years in the legislature. I've served with 3 governors, Brownback, Collier, and now Kelly, and there are always altercations and concerns and issues between the legislature and the executive branch. And I've been in meetings when Brownback was office, where we had differences as far as leadership in the House and the Senate with the governor. And so I wouldn't say it's a partisan issue. It's just you're going to have those differences between the executive and the legislature, because you might have the executive going down one path, the legislature wants to go down another, and you can't find a common ground regardless if you're Republican or Democrat. And like I said, I've experienced that dealing with all the 3 governors that I have in my 8 years.
Representative Johnson.
And I'd say this is one of the things where you can't throw mud without getting some on yourself. Yes. So there absolutely is partisan things going on so many issues, and sometimes it really is unnecessary. In this particular case, as she was, I think, speaking to the executive powers and what she would have under the pandemic, I think there was a genuine concern about a couple of things. And one is who controls the budget and the purse strings. And that does typically go to the legislature and the oversight. And while there are a lot of federal dollars, which tends to fall to the all funds budget, it is something that often there is some legislative oversight. And that was a desire that I did have to say, how can we, again, not wrest that control, but share that as we look at the different types of ways that we would allocate those funds. What some of the other things that we saw going on, and I think that was what she was referring to, but in terms of the closures, the differences in the counties, I think there really was a difference in how some folks across the state were ready to face the pandemic and the risks that were there. And I think that together we just needed to have that chance to have that council and figure out what will work best for the state. And I think that we got there with this last time through. I think to get back to the mud on both sides, the first time, and Representative Waymaster referenced the resolution that was passed at the end of the general session to say, hey, here's how we think we're going to handle this, because we really don't know. We have not been here before. And I would throw some back to say, I don't think it was wise for the governor to sue over that, in that was fairly delicately crafted. Yes, we agreed to a resolution because it was quicker and more direct. Putting it in statute would have put it to something that would have set that. We would not have been able to sue over that. But anyway, the general agreement was to say, hey, there's going to be some oversight on how this happens, and it definitely broke down, and I don't know that you can point to any one direction as to why. But I think the good news is a lot of people worked really hard over the last couple of weeks to come to something that we could live with, and I think that's the good news of the special session.
Now, within the COVID-19 response bill, Governor Kelly cannot use emergency powers to limit the sale of firearms or seize ammunition. Also, Governor Kelly is prohibited from making changes to the timing of elections. Governor Kelly is prohibited from ordering voting to take place solely through mail-in ballots. Governor Kelly has said she had no intention of doing any of those things, so the question becomes, why was it deemed necessary to incorporate those elements into the legislation?
Well, in the firearms and ammunition discussion in the resolution that we passed before we left in the month of March was actually something that was brought up by the Senate. There was a particular senator who wanted to have that included in the resolution because he didn't want her to restrict the ability for those who want to possess firearms or purchase ammunition. And we were in a meeting even before the resolution was passed, and it was with the House leadership, Senate leadership, myself, and then my counterpart on the Senate Ways and Means Committee. And this was the first time that we heard that we were going to be closing the school buildings across the state of Kansas. And I remember the governor looking straight over at the majority leader in the Senate and saying, "And tell your members I'm not going to take their guns." Because that conversation was already happening even at the early stages of this pandemic. That still got on the resolution. When it was in negotiations with the House and the Senate was adamant that they wanted to keep it. That was an item that just carried through in regards to it. So that's the reason why it was still on the final resolution or bill that was passed when we were back for the special session. Obviously, the biggest thing that the governor wanted, and she had expressed that in the meeting when we were with House and Senate leadership, is she wanted everything to go through the State Finance Council, and there's a particular reason why. She chairs it. The governor of the state of Kansas chairs the State Finance Council, and the governor of Kansas also has veto authority. So when we had passed the first resolution in the end of March, it bypassed the State Finance Council and went to the Legislative Coordinating Council, which is just set up of House and Senate leadership. When they were in negotiations on the resolution or the bill that she vetoed on the sine die on May 21st, that was her biggest win, was having everything going through the State Finance Council. Because if she particularly doesn't like how the State Finance Council votes, she can veto it. And then she would need to have enough members to override that veto. And given the makeup of the State Finance Council, that most likely is probably not going to happen. So I think some of the items were left in so she could have the ability to have all the items go to the State Finance Council, which was not ever discussed in the previous resolution or the bill. Everything was going to the Legislative Coordinating Council, and so that was a big win for the governor, having it go through the State Finance Council.
Any additional thoughts?
Sure. Do you have
no,
some?
go ahead.
Okay. Couple things and again, that is the most thorough answer direct to
Right.
your question. And I don't think that the likelihood of this governor to take firearms was there. I don't think so. But I think one of the things that got to that, in addition to it was an important item to that person or persons in the Senate, also was that trust had been damaged. And to say, well, I know that, but I want to make sure. And that happened through the lawsuit and other things that came after the first time at the end of the session. So that was one element. And the other thing to keep in mind as you deal with issues such as this is we're also setting a precedent of how things could be handled in the future. And how might you want those laws written, whichever details that are included, whether your governor is Kelly or Brownback, whether your Senate president is Wagle or Morris, whoever is holding those positions, how would you want that balance of power shared, and what are some of the key issues that are there? And sometimes that can get lost as you get through it, but that's a really important lens to make sure that we have policy that would last across various administrations.
Which was the other reason why we really wanted in statute that the counties had some choice and cities had some choice, because I think one of the beyond the unemployment issue during all of this, the other topic that I was the most emailed about were business closings. Like, for an example, a furniture store in Hayes, you never have 10 people in there at a time. And it's huge. So why were they forced to close? Why were some of these small town businesses that had very few people in them at any given time, why were they forced to close when they were being careful as well? So there was a feeling of winners and losers that we wanted to try to adjust and allow everyone to have some thought process in it and not have it just be one person making the decision. And I think that's true with any legislative body. That's why you have votes, and that's why you have a group of people, so you can come to the best choice, I believe, for the state of Kansas. And that's what I think we were really working for.
And moving ahead, pressing on, the Leavenworth Times Editorial Advisory Board had a fairly blistering critique of the special session. It was published online June 7th. This is from the editorial board. Quote, "They didn't expand Medicaid. They didn't really address the crisis facing Kansans either, who are grappling with historic threats to their health and livelihoods. But they did reject a judicial nominee. Welcome to the special session of the Kansas Legislature. 2 days of backroom deal-making and wasted potential. It was an outcome that made everyone involved look smaller and left the people of our state the losers," unquote. Now, how would you respond to sentiments or viewpoints of that nature where some feel no one, the Kansas Legislature as an institutional body or the governor, comes out of this looking like they address the problems or concerns of Kansans?
Well, I would just probably say to that, I think the most blistering thing was sine die, not the special session. Some of the items that we were trying to get done on basically 1 day's time, which we carried over past midnight into 8 o'clock the next morning, being there for 24 hours just trying to get items that were not able to address, or we had decided to put them off until the end of session, but because we could not have the typical veto session, we tried to do it in 1 day. That was actually, I would say, not my best time in the legislature. The special sessions generally just deal with one issue. And that issue at hand was the executive order. And at times, and when we had the special session on the 50-50 law under Governor Brownback, we did confirmations of his appointees at that time as well. So because they didn't happen to confirm the appointee from Governor Kelly, I don't know if that has a reason behind some of the wording behind that editorial, but special sessions are just one issue, because if you open it up to other issues, it's a plethora of other issues coming forward that we were not able to address in the regular session. So in order to address that one particular issue, special sessions are designed just to address one issue, at least in the 3 that I've been a part of. We have never ventured off into other issues except for the one that we were actually called back from by the governor.
And it really, there is a reason for that in trying to stay focused on the special session. And I think what I'm hearing in the frustration from that particular editorial is they're wanting Medicaid expansion and seeing that.
Debate it.
What's that?
We did debate it in the House.
And we did.
As
Not
an amendment.
but yeah, not as a part of the final package. It did come up, the challenge when you have an issue such as that, and it's one that I have voted for and would have if it had come up. However, this is an agreement between all the parties, and you've got to make sure that you don't lose the main objective that is there. Right. And should we have taken that up? And I had entered a tax bill because I think that the internet tax issue was one that should have been addressed in some way for certainty for out-of-state sellers and small businesses. But it doesn't rise above that carefully crafted agreement that we had as a basis to work from. So if I bring up Medicaid expansion and I send Senate leadership off the deep end, I lose the whole thing. And now I'm there for weeks trying to accomplish the certainty that is necessary under the Emergency Powers Act to make sure that we don't put federal funds at risk because we have not ratified the governor's executive order. All of those things that were clearly the primary objective of the special session. There are many things that were there and were entered as bills to be considered in addition to that, but I would disagree with that particular editorial board in saying that those very important issues would have risen to the level to disrupt, derail, and possibly set a special session on a collision course to go many weeks to ever get back to the table.
I mean, go ahead. Go ahead, Barbara.
Sorry. There are so many things that we all wanted. Can we add the escrow payments for delinquent and non-delinquent taxes? Can we do, I mean, things that just seem like that would be an easy thing to do, but once you start to tip that apple cart, you lose just about everybody. So it was very carefully crafted. This is my first 2 years in the House, so I've been House
First
trained.
special session.
Yes, first special session. So all of it was for political junkies is very interesting to watch the machinations of everyone, whether it's the governor or the Senate or the House, and everyone coming together to this one, particularly with the end votes, is nothing short of amazing, truly. So we had a couple of amendments requested by Republicans, but the Democrats came up with all sorts of different things. So, you know, it's very fascinating to see how things work, and I think we ended up getting together pretty well. Like I said, not all of us are happy with what's going on, and we'd like to change things, tweak things, but I think the legislature will come back in January with great resolve to take care of those things and do what's best for Kansans. Adding foster care report cards, that's another good one. Fixing the tax code and different things in tax. I think it's going to be a very busy next session.
And Representative Jim Ward of Wichita did want Medicaid expansion as an amendment to the COVID-19 response bill. It was blocked in terms of House rules regarding the germaneness of language. Now, in 2017, the Kansas Health Institute and the Kansas Legislative Research Department reported about 50,000 previously uninsured residents would be covered through Medicaid expansion. Given all that has come about with the COVID-19 pandemic, with more and more people in a vulnerable position economically, do you think we're going to see a bipartisan effort on Medicaid in the next session?
Oh, we did this last session. Before we even convened in January, the majority leader of the Senate and the governor had crafted a plan together and actually, toured the state in regards to Medicaid expansion. I believe that they had the votes in the Senate in order to pass that. And that was one of the things that was agreed upon during the 2019 legislative session, because the budget had been stalled for about 3 days because the supporters of Medicaid expansion on both sides of the aisle had said they would not vote in favor of the budget, which is the last thing that we have to pass before the legislative session can convene, unless there was a discussion of Medicaid expansion on the Senate side. And that was an agreement that was made with the majority leader of the Senate. And he held true to that to a point, because as I mentioned, he did meet with Governor Kelly and they did craft a bipartisan bill. I think in all anticipation, they were hoping it was going to get a vote, and he had promised that there would be a vote on the Senate floor in January of 2020. However, that never transpired. And so at the very last minute, and Representative Ward has brought Medicaid expansion numerous times to the House floor in many different types of bill formats that he was trying to get it amended to. It has never been found germane because the House rules say that it has to have 2 points of connection in regards to the underlying bill, and there might have been one, but there wasn't that second point that made the amendment germane to the underlying bill. So he brought it forth thinking that we're talking about a pandemic, then that would classify as healthcare. And then it came back from the Rules Committee that no, there was not the 2 points of connection. We did have a vote because he challenged the Rules Chair's decision, and so we had to go through that process. But there has been a bipartisan bill. As far as what's going to convey into the 2021 session, I don't know, because we're going to be having elections. We have a lot of individuals who are not going to be coming back to the legislature, one of those being the Senate Majority Leader. He has decided not to seek re-election. So it's going to be a different dynamic depending on how the elections turn out in August and in November.
Representative Johnson.
So the same on that, and the thing I would add is the Rules Committee, which Representative Waymaster referenced, is also bipartisan. That's not one size controls everything. So it was a robust discussion through that, and to Representative Ward's point or the editorial board's point, and I get the concern and I get the desire how big that issue is and others, but if you say, well, just this one issue, we're just going to have one spurious point and we're going to call that good. Oh my goodness. Now everything is relevant.
You've opened a
All
can
of those
worms.
things, right, because the tax piece is relevant, because there are property tax delays that were also part of the veto, which is related to the pandemic. There were sales tax issues that are related to increased internet sales, and we are off to the races. It's not as if, Representative Ward is very sharp. He's got a lot of issues down, and he knows the rules very well also, and was our minority leader for a period of time. So while certainly you can challenge and give the best try you can to that one, I don't think it was a surprise that the Rules Committee would find that not being germane.
Representative Wasinger, any quick thoughts?
I think you guys covered it. It happens. There's so many different things that we passed that the Senate didn't bring up. I think the Senate had passed, but we didn't have a chance to bring up. And truly, it's not like we all just get there and look at something and vote. If it was, we could get, a lot of different things passed if there was no discussion on it. But the purpose behind the discussion and purpose behind the debate is to hone what you're doing. So I just think, like you said, it's going to be very different next year. Different people running for Senate, they won't be back, people retiring, and then elections themselves really throw things up in the air. So we'll see how it goes.
We'll move forward to our callers. Charlie in Strong City. Thank you for calling into the Kansas Legislature.
I have a question. Are you all planning on Medicaid and the sales tax on internet sales next year? And I've got another question having to do with police training and the issues that we're seeing now on national riots and that kind of thing. And so I'd ask what you'd think of having some legislation introduced to have a special counsel out of the Attorney General's office to be the prosecutor or special prosecutor for investigations of fatalities that are caused by police arrest and that kind of thing, so that we didn't have the local county attorney involved with prosecuting a sheriff's deputy or a police officer who he has to work with on a general in his prosecutor duties. So I'm asking if you would be in favor of having a special prosecutor out of the Attorney General's office and a special investigators to investigate those cases.
We just had two representatives right before we left discuss one in front of us. One is a law enforcement officer. The other is Representative Barbara Ballard, who's a woman of color, and they spoke so beautifully about everything that's going on. It is not the legislature's job, I shouldn't say not duty, but job to micromanage law enforcement throughout the state. And for the most part, just like with this police officer, clearly he made some very poor choices and was kind of a bad apple, if you ask me. And they're going to be that. They're going to be legislators who aren't there to do things for Kansas. They're there to make themselves look better or go farther in their careers. We all just need to get together and remember that every person is a person of worth, every human, and that will make a huge difference. And I think the majority of police officers are horrified by what happened. I don't think anyone's celebrating how this happened, and I appreciate we had a lot of protesters in Hays, which is in Ellis County, and they were wonderful. They showed what they were thinking. I waved to them because I appreciate that's what the amazing part about America is. You have the freedom of speech and the right to get together and be angry about things, and it changes things when people do that. When they go out and riot and ruin other people's property, that I think is really inappropriate. So I think that Eric Smith and Barbara Ballard put it very, very well, and Barbara put it very simply, but it's true. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And if we all just did that and remembered what we were taught when we were little in Bible school and churches, that I think the whole world would be a better place.
We'll press forward with another caller, Deborah from Anthony. Welcome to the Kansas Legislature.
Yes, thank you. And I think everyone needs to be commended for all the work they've done for the past few months, irregardless of criticism. If you were in your shoes, if they were in your shoes, rather, they would think differently. But my question is, the federal tax code will allow for 2020 estimated tax payments that are due April 15th and June 15th are now due on July 15th, but I saw where the state of Kansas has not changed their estimated tax due dates for 2020 from 4/15 and 6/15 to 7/15. Is there any chance of getting that done so that people are not penalized for not getting their first and second quarter estimated tax payments made?
Next year.
Yes.
I was going to say Representative Johnson.
Yes. So thanks for the question, Deborah. And unfortunately, there is not. One of the things that was lost was the chance to delay those payments as it was wrapped with other things on property tax, et cetera. But that did not change. And so if you've got estimated payments due on June 15th, it will not delay to July. So, and there's not a chance for us to do it. It is one we can follow up with, and I will with the Department of Revenue to see if there's anything that they can issue in terms of additional guidance or flexibility. And I'll try and follow up. If we have a number, I'll try and give a call later if there's a way that we can do that directly through the Department of Revenue. So.
Well, that was one of the bills that the governor vetoed.
Yes, it was.
And she said it was too costly for the state to allow citizens to put off their tax payments and things like that. So the discussion is not so much with us, it is with the governor in that sense, because she did veto that bill. As well as the banking bill, which used idle funds to give small business loans up to $250,000, and also created a report card for foster children, all of which she said before were important to her. So she then vetoed them, and we did not get to them again.
I'm saying the only action that probably could be taken is if the governor does exhibit and make another executive order that has to be approved by the State Finance Council. I mean, that's an avenue.
That is.
But I don't know if, given the comments that have been made in the past, if that would actually happen.
And we have another caller to the Kansas Legislature, Dean from Hoisington. Dean, welcome to the Kansas Legislature.
Thank you. appreciate all the work that the representatives do for us back in Topeka. I've been a long-time school board member, and this is probably one of the most challenging times for developing a budget between the COVID response and then the uncertainty about the state finance situation. When do you think we can start looking at seeing if there will be cuts or how we can deal with the education portion of the state budget?
Well, Chris, if I could take that one, because actually that's something that we covered today at our meeting in Topeka with, as I mentioned, I'm a member of the Spark Task Force. And there were 4 basic silos or different areas that we focused on, one of those being education. Not only K through 12 education, but also higher education as well. And so what we're looking at, and by the federal guidelines that was passed by the legislation and was passed by Congress and signed by President Trump, we have to allocate those funds by December 30th of 2020. If we do not allocate any of those funds, then it goes back to the federal government. So right now where we're sitting at in regards to the CARES Act money that the state of Kansas received is a total of about $1.2 billion. Now about $116 million of that went to Johnson County, $99 million of that went to Sedgwick County, which basically leaves about a little over $1 billion for the state of Kansas. Now, the executive committee for the Spark Committee authorized last week $400 million to go out to the other 103 counties throughout the state of Kansas who did not receive money because their population was not over 500,000. So basically they came up with a formula that said Johnson and Sedgwick basically received $194 per resident, so we're going to assess that to all the other 103 counties across the state. That then leaves the task force with $600 million on how we're going to disperse those funds. I mentioned before there are 4 different silos, and that's education, economic development, infrastructure, and healthcare. And so we broke out into workstations today and actually discussed what we're going to do for K through 12 education. And if there is a second wave that comes this fall, how we prepare our K through 12 education districts to basically go back to an online learning format or distance learning, whatever the case may be, so we can prepare the school districts and not have the brash change that we had when the announcement of the school buildings that were going to be closed. So we're still working on that. We're actually having our next meeting on June 22nd. Today was just kind of, I don't want to say a brainstorming session, but it was just kind of a different thoughts from everybody coming together and seeing exactly what we can do to, the one thing that we can't do with the CARES Act money, and I think this is very important, so that's why I want to preface it, is it cannot backfill a shortfall within a budget, either that be for the state, county, city, or school district. So the money has to be directed for COVID-19 related expenses. So if we can make the correlation that if there is a second wave coming in the state of Kansas in the fall, then that money can be used to prepare our school districts in order if that second wave does happen to occur.
Now, Representative Waymaster, one of the things that I just want to ask real quickly, because you mentioned that the $1.25 million from the CARES Act can't cover the budget shortfall.
Correct.
Why is the Kansas legislature giving such broad power over spending over the next few months, given that a lot of the COVID-19 response bill seems to serve as a check or limit the boundaries of power and authority that Governor Kelly has, because until January, Governor Kelly is going to be pretty much responsible for making cuts.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing. We're looking at a $650 million deficit in fiscal year 2021. And this money cannot be used to backfill that deficit. In fiscal year 2020, we're still sitting at about $220 million to the positive. We have a surplus. But when you factor everything from the tax revenue estimates that came out in April, that is what's making the deficit in fiscal year 2021. So the money that is coming in from the federal government cannot be used to backfill the deficit situation with the state general fund. We have to use that money, and it has to actually be characterized as COVID-19 related. So if there's any county or city, school district entity that we do administer the funds to, it has to be directed for a COVID-19 related item. And if it's not, then the federal government can pull that money back. And so that's the biggest correlation, is we cannot use it for the state budget.
Okay, thank you, Representative Waymaster, and thank you, representatives, for participating. This is the final session of the Kansas Legislature until the 2021 session. Thank you for watching. Be well, be safe, be healthy. Take care.